She had spent her entire life drowning in other people's hearts, and then she met the one man who sounded like silence. Celia Vane stood motionless at the edge of docking ring 12 while the station breathed around her in waves of noise no one else could hear. To the merchants dragging cargo crates across the grated floor, to the families hurrying beneath the cold blue transit lights, to the customs officers scanning arrivals with sleepy eyes, the orbital port was only crowded. To Celia, it was unbearable. Every living thing within 50 feet struck her senses at once. Quick anxious flutter from a child clutching a silver toy ship. Slow, heavy thud from a dockworker with tired lungs and a bad shoulder. A pair of synchronized pulses from twin pilots laughing near the coffee stand. Hundreds of rhythms, some smooth, some erratic, some bright with excitement, some dim with grief, all beating against the inside of her skull like rain on thin glass. Her people called it a gift. The ability to hear the living current inside every body had made the Vanes trusted negotiators, prized lie readers, guardians of truth in a galaxy built on polished deception. But tonight, after 12 straight hours escorting a trade delegation through the station's lower sectors, it felt less like a gift and more like a room with no doors. She pressed two slender fingers to the base of her throat and lowered her eyes, trying to steady herself. The air smelled of recycled oxygen, engine coolant, and a bitter trace of burned wiring drifting from one of the maintenance shafts overhead. Somewhere beyond the docking glass, a cargo shuttle rolled past in silence, its thrusters glowing amber against the black. The station lights shimmered across Celia's blue skin in pale ribbons. She exhaled slowly. One breath in. One breath out. Ignore the noise. Count the rhythms. Separate them. Order them. That was what she had been trained to do since childhood. That was what she always did. Then something changed. It was so sudden that her eyes snapped open before her mind caught up. Not a new sound. The absence of one. A gap. A clean, impossible hollow in the storm of living signal around her. Celia turned toward the central corridor just as a man stepped out from behind a service hatch with a diagnostic tablet tucked under one arm and a wrench clipped to his belt. He was tall in an ordinary, human sort of way, broad-shouldered but unremarkable, wearing a faded gray station utility jacket with grease at one cuff and a name patch that read Walker. His dark hair looked like he had run a hand through it too many times, and there was something tired but steady in the set of his mouth, the kind of face people forgot 5 minutes after passing it in a hallway. But Celia did not forget him. She stared because every heart around him reached her exactly as it should. The clerk behind the kiosk. The woman stepping off the tram. The officer by the checkpoint. All of them. Everyone except him. Her senses moved toward his chest and found nothing. No bass note under the ribs. No warm percussion beneath muscle and breath. No private rhythm hiding behind the bones. It was not that his heart was weak. It was not distant. It was simply not there for her. The silence around him was not empty in the way of death. It was whole. Calm. Untouched. Sacred. The man glanced up from his tablet and caught her staring. For a second, neither of them moved. Then he gave her the brief, polite nod strangers offered each other 1,000 times a day and started walking toward the maintenance corridor as if he had not just split her universe open without even trying. Celia's pulse kicked hard against her ribs. For the first time in 28 years, the galaxy had gone quiet in one small place, and it was following that human down the hall. Ethan Walker did not notice the alien woman follow him at first, because most nights on Meridian Station felt exactly the same. The corridor beyond docking ring 12 was cooler than the public concourse by at least 10 degrees, and the air carried that familiar mix of metal dust, old insulation, and the faint sharp smell of ozone that never really left the maintenance levels. Overhead strips of white light buzzed softly behind cloudy plastic covers, turning the steel walls a tired shade of gray. Ethan moved through it with the easy rhythm of a man who had spent too many years inside machines to be impressed by any of them. His boots rang against the grated floor. His tablet glowed in one hand with a list of pressure fluctuations on level C. His other hand brushed the wrench at his hip out of habit more than need. He was 34, broad through the shoulders from lifting parts the station loaders still claimed were above safe manual limits, and permanently a little short on sleep. There was grease under one fingernail, a healing scrape across the back of his knuckles, and a kind of patient expression that came from solving the same problems for people who only noticed you when something broke. He liked it that way. Machines made sense. People usually did not. At the next junction he crouched beside an access panel, keyed in his code, and listened as the magnetic lock clicked open. Somewhere inside the wall a ventilation fan was knocking in an uneven rhythm. He could hear the difference before the station sensors flagged it, which was one of the reasons his supervisor tolerated his habit of ignoring non-essential paperwork. Ethan pulled the panel back and leaned in, squinting at a line of service conduits washed in amber maintenance light. A loose brace. A vibration issue. Nothing dramatic. Good. He set his tablet down on the floor and reached in with a compact driver, tightening the mount 1/4 turn at a time until the rattle eased into a clean hum. That was when he caught the reflection of blue skin in the panel glass. He straightened too quickly and bumped his shoulder on the frame. The same woman from the docking ring stood a few feet behind him, tall and still in the narrow corridor, her posture elegant even under the hard station lighting. Up close she looked less like a passenger and more like someone important trying very hard not to look important. Her coat was dark and tailored, cut from fabric that caught the light like deep water, and the silver clasp at her throat marked money or rank or both. But what held him for a second were her eyes. They were not fearful. They were focused, intent, almost bewildered, as if he were the first strange thing she had seen in a very long time. Ethan picked up his tablet. "Can I help you?" he asked. Her gaze dropped to his chest, then lifted to his face again. "You are Ethan Walker." It was not a question. Her voice was low and clear, with that measured musical cadence some off-worlders had when standard was their second language. Ethan gave a cautious half-smile. "Usually, yes." The joke landed nowhere. She took one small step closer, and for reasons he could not name, the corridor suddenly felt quieter than it should have. "I need to ask you something," she said. Ethan had dealt with lost tourists, drunk freighter crews, customs disputes, and one very memorable politician trapped in a restroom door, but there was something about the way she looked at him that made all his usual answers feel useless. He shifted his weight and waited. Her next words came soft, almost careful, as if she was afraid saying them too loudly might break whatever stood between them. "Why is it that when I stand near everyone else, I hear life, but when I stand near you, I hear nothing at all?" Ethan stared at her for a beat too long, not because he believed what she had said, but because she had said it with the kind of calm that made nonsense sound dangerously close to truth. The maintenance corridor hummed around them, a steady ribbon of recycled air moving through vents above his head, carrying the clean metallic chill of the station's inner systems. Somewhere down the line, a pressure valve clicked twice and settled. Normal sounds. Familiar sounds. Things he understood. The woman in front of him was not one of those things. He slid the tablet under his arm and gave her a careful look, taking in the fine silver tracing at the cuff of her coat, the polished boots that had never seen a cargo bay floor, the way she held herself like someone raised in rooms where people waited for her to speak first. "Okay," he said at last, voice even. "That is not the strangest thing anyone has said to me on this station, but it is in the top 5. For the first time, a faint crease touched her brow. "You think I am joking?" "I think," Ethan said, "that you are asking a maintenance tech why your alien superpower is acting up, and I am probably not on the approved troubleshooting list." Her eyes stayed on him, bright and unsettlingly direct. "It is not acting up." She said it quietly, but there was steel under the softness now. "It has never failed. Not once. Not with my family. Not with strangers. Not through walls, not through crowds, not even through station plating when the signal is strong enough. I hear every living rhythm near me. She took another step, slow enough that he could have backed away if he wanted to. He did not. Except yours. Ethan let out a breath through his nose. You can hear heartbeats. Yes. Like with your ears. No, that clears everything up. To his surprise, something almost like frustration flickered across her face. You are making light of this because you do not understand what silence means to someone who has never known it. That landed a little differently. Ethan did not know why. Maybe because underneath the polished composure, she sounded tired. Not dramatic. Not unstable. Just deeply, seriously worn thin. He had seen that look before in overworked mechanics, in med-bay staff at the end of double shifts, in himself on mornings when the station woke up already broken. He rested the back of his head briefly against the cool wall panel and studied her again. All right, he said. Start over. Pretend I am slow, because compared to whatever world you came from, I probably am. What exactly are you hearing when you hear people? She blinked, as if the question itself surprised her. Then she answered with care. Patterns. Tempo. Strain. Calm. Fear, sometimes, before the face shows it. Illness before a scanner catches it. Deception, if the body argues with the mouth. Ethan gave a low whistle. That sounds exhausting. A tiny pause. It is. He had not expected honesty to make her seem younger, but it did. Less like a diplomat or officer, more like a woman carrying a talent she had never been allowed to put down. Ethan shifted his weight and held out a hand. Ethan Walker. Since apparently you know my name already. Her gaze dropped to his hand as if it were an unfamiliar tool. Then she placed her fingers in his. Her skin was cool from the corridor air, smooth and steady. Celia Vane, she said. The moment their hands met, her eyes widened. Ethan felt it too, not as anything mystical, just a strange stillness in the space between breaths, like the whole corridor had leaned in to listen. Celia drew in a slow breath and did not let go right away. It is even quieter when I touch. You, she whispered. Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, the corridor lights shifted from white to amber and a station voice rolled overhead, calm and mechanical. Maintenance sectors C through F are now under temporary pressure lockdown. Please remain where you are until seal verification is complete. The magnetic doors at both ends of the corridor slammed shut with a heavy, echoing clunk, and Ethan looked from the sealed exit to the alien woman still holding his hand, suddenly aware that whatever this was, neither of them was walking away from it just yet. The corridor held still for half a second after the lockdown doors sealed, as if even the station itself was listening to what had just happened. Then the ventilation system shifted into containment mode with a deeper mechanical thrum, and a thin ribbon of colder air spilled from the vents overhead. Ethan pulled his hand back on instinct and looked toward the nearest sealed bulkhead, its status strip glowing amber across the center seam. Great, he muttered. That is usually not a good color. Celia turned her head slightly, as though measuring the station by some sense beyond sight. The metallic hush around them was broken by the faint hiss of pressure regulators cycling behind the walls, then by the calm station voice repeating the alert in 3 different languages. Temporary pressure lockdown. Seal verification in progress. Estimated delay unknown. Ethan blew out a breath and bent to retrieve his tablet from the floor. The screen had switched to emergency access mode, which meant half his normal controls were gone and the other half were being stubborn on purpose. Well, he said, tapping through the diagnostic overlay, unless you happen to outrank station safety protocols, we are staying put for a while. I do outrank many things, Celia said. He glanced up. That was either a joke or the most worrying sentence I have heard all week. To his surprise, the corner of her mouth moved almost imperceptibly. Not quite a smile. Close enough to count. Ethan crouched by the wall terminal and plugged in his tablet with a braided service lead from his belt. Lines of system text scrolled across the glass, pale blue against black. Pressure irregularity in Sector E, automated seal deployment across C through F, manual override denied pending structural review. He gave the terminal a look of long-suffering disappointment. There is no structural review, he said. There is just one bad pressure sensor somewhere trying to impress its supervisor. Celia remained where she was, but some of the rigidness had gone out of her posture. Maybe it was the sealed corridor, or the absence of foot traffic, or simply that there were no longer 100 strangers passing close enough to crowd her senses. Under the amber lights her skin looked darker, more ocean than sky, and the silver clasp at her throat caught each pulse of warning light like a tiny moon. "You are calm," she said. Ethan snorted softly. "No, I am employed. There is a difference." He ran another bypass attempt, got denied again, and sat back on his heels. "This section is old. Sometimes the environmental system panics if a seal reads 2% off from baseline. We wait, it checks itself, and eventually the computer admits I was right." Celia lowered herself onto a narrow equipment crate bolted to the wall across from him. The movement was graceful but careful, as if sitting without ceremony was not something she did often. "And if the computer does not admit you were right? Then I file a report, use 12 unnecessary passwords, and start arguing with a machine that has better union protection than I do." That almost smile returned, this time with a little warmth behind it. The corridor seemed to soften with it. Ethan noticed the change in her before he understood it. Her shoulders had dropped a fraction. Her breathing had evened out. The alert light still pulsed amber over steel and conduit, but the tension had drained from the air between them in a way he could not explain. Celia folded her hands in her lap and looked at him with open curiosity now, not just confusion. "It is quieter here than it has ever been for me," she said. Her voice came low and honest, stripped of formality. "Not because the station is silent. Because you are in it." Ethan looked back at the terminal, then at her, then back again like the machinery might offer a useful response. It did not. Outside the corridor, Meridian Station continued on with all its sealed compartments, docking schedules, engine heat, and human mess. Inside that strip of amber light, with the walls humming and the doors shut, Ethan Walker became aware of something he had not felt in a very long time. Not danger. Not pressure. Presence. As if the station had narrowed to one locked corridor, one impossible question, and one woman looking at him like silence was the first kindness she had ever been given. Celia did not look away from him, and Ethan had the uneasy feeling that most people probably did. Not because she was threatening, but because being observed that carefully made a man aware of every tired habit he carried in his face. The amber warning lights continued their slow pulse along the corridor walls, washing the metal in alternating gold and shadow while the terminal beside him chewed through another useless verification cycle. Somewhere behind the bulkhead, coolant lines ticked as temperatures adjusted. The station had settled into the kind of temporary emergency that became boring if it lasted long enough. Celia leaned forward slightly on the equipment crate, her hands still folded, her voice quiet and deliberate. "May I try something?" Ethan gave her a look. "That depends how much paperwork it creates." "No paperwork," she said. "Only observation. Those are the lies that lead to paperwork." A faint glimmer of amusement touched her eyes again, but she rose before it faded. She moved with measured grace across the narrow corridor until she stood directly in front of him, close enough now that Ethan could see the fine iridescent pattern along the edge of her blue skin where her jaw met the light. It was subtle, like color hidden in polished stone. Her presence carried none of the perfume or synthetic scents common in the passenger rings, only the clean trace of cold air and something mineral, like rain on metal. "Do not move," she said. Ethan arched an eyebrow. "You say that like I have a history of sprinting away from confusing situations." She ignored that and lifted one hand, stopping an inch from the center of his chest without touching him. Her eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but concentration. Ethan felt ridiculous all at once, standing in a sealed maintenance corridor while an elegant alien woman held her palm near his heart like she was trying to warm her fingers at a fire no one else could see. He almost made another joke, but something in her expression stopped him. There was strain there now. Focus. A careful listening that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than hearing. The silence stretched. The hum of the ventilation fans filled it. A regulator clicked twice overhead. Far beyond the locked doors, a tram rolled along the station spine with a distant metallic whisper. Celia moved her hand a little closer. Her breathing stayed even. Then she frowned. Nothing, she murmured. Ethan looked down at the space between her hand and his jacket. I am definitely still in here. I know. Her voice had gone softer, almost troubled. She shifted to his left side, then his right, as if angle might matter. She stepped back 3 feet and closed her eyes. She stepped closer again until there was barely room between them. Still nothing seemed to satisfy her. At last she said, "May I touch your wrist?" Ethan hesitated only a second before holding out his arm. Her fingers closed lightly around it, cool and steady against his skin, resting over the pulse point with practiced precision. Any medic would have found it in an instant. Celia's eyes shut again. Ethan could feel his own heartbeat there, plain as ever, regular and human and annoyingly unhelpful. After a few seconds her brow tightened, not because she had found something alarming, but because she had found exactly what she had feared. I can feel it with my hand, she said. But I cannot hear it. It is like touching a bell that rings for everyone except me. Ethan studied her face. The polished composure from the docking ring had slipped again, and beneath it was something far simpler than mystery. Frustration. Wonder. A little disbelief. He had seen technicians wear that expression over impossible readings and surgeons wear it over scans that refused to make sense. Maybe it is me, he said. I had an accident years ago. Deep field repair job near a magnetics array. Got tossed around pretty good when the containment grid hiccuped. Since then, some sensors read me funny. Celia opened her eyes at that. What kind of funny? Ethan gave a small shrug. Medical scanner once told me I was mildly hypothermic and dehydrated while I was drinking coffee in a room set to 72 degrees. Another one flagged an irregular bioelectric signature and then apologized after recalibration. Machines lose you, she said. Sometimes. He met her gaze. Apparently you do too. For the first time since she had entered the corridor, Celia smiled without restraint. It was not large, but it changed her completely, taking the weight out of her face and replacing it with something bright and briefly young. No, she said. That is the part one do not understand. Her fingers still rested on his wrist, and though the corridor remained locked, though the lights were still amber and the station still busy beyond steel and sealant, Ethan had the strange sense that something far more important than a faulty pressure door had just begun. The station eventually tired of alarming them and dropped into a quieter rhythm, the amber lights dimming slightly between pulses until the corridor felt less like an emergency and more like a place the rest of Meridian had forgotten. Ethan sat on an overturned service case beside the wall terminal with his tablet balanced across one knee, watching another progress bar crawl from left to right with all the urgency of cold syrup in winter. Celia had returned to the equipment crate across from him, but the distance between them no longer felt guarded. It felt measured. Intentional. The air was cool enough now that the exposed metal edges of the conduit housing held a faint silver sheen, and every few minutes the vents breathed out another stream of refrigerated station air that smelled of filters, steel, and old insulation. Somewhere deeper in the maintenance deck, a compressor engaged with a low shudder that traveled through the floor and into Ethan's boots. Celia seemed to notice it without reacting. That, more than anything, told him how much calmer she had become. When he had first seen her in the docking ring, she had carried herself like a woman bracing against invisible weather. Now she looked almost still. Not rigid. Rested. He glanced up from the tablet. You okay? The question sounded smaller than he meant it to. Celia looked at him as if she was deciding how honest to be. Then she said, "I do not remember the last time the world was this quiet." Ethan set the tablet aside. "Your hearing thing is always on." "It is not hearing in the human sense, but yes." She lowered her hands into her lap and watched the faint warning light slide over her fingers. "When I was a child, they told me it would become easier once I learned discipline. They were not wrong. I can separate signals now. I can function in crowds, negotiate through noise, sleep through distant rhythms if I must. But easy is not the same as silent." Her mouth softened with something that was not quite sadness and not quite relief. "There is always someone nearby. A guard outside a door. A pilot above my cabin. A stranger in the next room. Life does not stop speaking." Ethan leaned back against the wall panel, its chill pressing through his utility jacket. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." She said it with a faint smile this time, as though the word had lost some of its weight simply by being admitted aloud. "On my world, people like me are considered useful. Honored, even. We are trained early. Watched closely. Trusted with secrets because we can hear what others hide from themselves." Her gaze drifted to him, steady and bright in the dim corridor. "No one asks what it costs to never be alone inside your own mind." Ethan did not answer right away. He knew something about being valued for function. Fix the system. Patch the line. Solve the problem. Keep moving. People tended to love the result and ignore the wear on the tool. He rubbed a thumb along the edge of his tablet and said, "For what it is worth, I am glad the station trapped you next to the one guy who apparently glitches your universe." That earned him a real smile, quiet and unguarded. "You say strange things, Ethan Walker. Occupational hazard." A soft chime came from the terminal beside him, and both of them turned. The lockdown timer had reset, adding another 42 minutes to the SEAL review. Ethan stared at it, then laughed once under his breath. "Well, that is offensive." Celia tilted her head. "Is that bad?" "It means the computer has made peace with being wrong and wants all of us to suffer for it." He stood and stretched, shoulders popping lightly, then crossed to a recessed storage hatch built into the wall. After a quick override, the panel slid open to reveal emergency maintenance supplies, thermal wraps, sealant packs, 2 respirators, and a pair of squat silver water canisters. Ethan grabbed one and offered it to her. "Not elegant," he said, "but it is cold." Celia accepted it with both hands. Their fingers brushed again, and this time neither of them pulled away too quickly. She unscrewed the cap, took a small sip, and closed her eyes for a second as if even the water tasted different here. "I think," she said softly, "that this may be the first place in years where my thoughts sound like my own." Ethan looked at her, really looked, and felt something in his chest shift with quiet force. Not pity. Not fascination. Recognition. Outside the locked corridor, thousands of lives moved through steel and light and noise. Inside it, one alien woman had found silence for the first time, and somehow it had chosen his shadow to live in. The added 42 minutes changed the corridor in a way Ethan had not expected. What had begun as a delay now felt almost separate from the rest of the station, like a narrow pocket of time suspended behind steel and sealant while Meridian moved on without them. The warning light still washed the walls in slow amber pulses, but the urgency had thinned. The air had settled into a steady coolness that brushed the skin and carried the faint dry taste of recycled filters. Ethan sat again on the service case with one boot planted flat and the other stretched forward, elbows resting on his knees, while Celia remained on the crate across from him with the silver water canister turning slowly between her hands. Every now and then the metal clicked softly beneath her fingers. It was a small sound, but in that corridor it seemed to matter. Celia studied him for a long moment, not intrusively now, but with the patient curiosity of someone assembling a picture from details no one else would think to offer. You said you had an accident, she said at last. Near a magnetic field array. Ethan let out a quiet breath and tipped his head back against the wall. Yeah. About 8 years ago. Outer repair platform over Callaway Station. Nothing glamorous. A relay failure, a half-finished shift, and a supervisor who thought warning labels were a suggestion. Celia waited, and something in her stillness made it easier to continue. The containment field around the array started stuttering while I was out on the rig. Not enough to throw sparks or trigger full alarms. Just enough to make every instrument lie at once. He looked down at his hands, turning one palm upward as though the story might still be written there. The skin was rough, nicked in places, ordinary. We were supposed to pull back and wait for a shutdown. Instead we tried to stabilize the relay manually. I reached for the housing at the exact wrong second. The corridor hummed softly around them. Celia's gaze did not leave his face. Ethan gave a small shrug that could not quite make the memory casual. When the field snapped, it hit like standing too close to a thunderstorm you cannot see. Not pain exactly. More like every nerve in my body forgot which direction time was moving. They told me later my heart stopped for 11 seconds. Celia's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the canister. Ethan noticed and offered a faint, reassuring smile. I got better. Mostly. Took a while. Couple weeks in med bay, a few months pretending I was fine, then several years discovering that machines and I had developed a complicated relationship. Because of the field exposure, she said softly. That is the theory. My charts looked normal enough, but scanners started reading strange offsets. Bioelectric interference. Signal drift. One doctor said my nervous system was carrying residual charge patterns that did not belong to any standard template. Another said I was lucky to be alive and should stop asking interesting questions. Celia lowered her eyes briefly, then raised them again. And did you? No, Ethan said. I just learned which machines to ignore. That earned him the smallest breath of laughter, warm and brief. He watched it change her face and found himself wanting to hear it again. Why did you keep doing this work, she asked. After something like that. Ethan considered the question. Beyond the sealed bulkhead a distant vibration rolled through the deck, probably a docking clamp resetting 2 levels below. The sound faded into the steel like a remembered thought. Because I was good at it, he said finally. Because things break whether you are scared of them or not. Because somebody still has to climb into the ugly parts of a station and make sure strangers keep breathing. Celia looked at him in silence after that, and it was not the empty kind. It was full. Intent. Almost reverent. On my world, she said, people would have called surviving such a thing a sign. Ethan rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. On mine, it usually means extra paperwork. This time her smile stayed. She leaned back slightly, the tension in her shoulders easing as if his story had answered some question deeper than science. Perhaps both worlds are correct, she murmured. Ethan was about to say something light in return when the wall terminal beside him flickered, its screen briefly flooding with static before a new line of text appeared in pale blue across black. Biometric anomaly detected in sealed corridor C-12. Ethan and Celia both turned toward it at the same instant, and the quiet they had built together suddenly felt less private than before. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. The pale blue warning line sat on the terminal like a thought the station should not have had, thin and precise against the black screen. Biometric anomaly detected in sealed corridor C-12. Ethan stood first, setting his water canister down on the service case with a hollow metallic tap. The terminal reflected the amber corridor lights and broken streaks across his face as he stepped closer and scanned the system line again, as if reading it twice might make it less irritating. That, he said quietly, is new. Celia rose from the crate, every trace of ease gone from her posture, though not because she was afraid. Ethan was beginning to understand the difference. Fear made people smaller. Celia did not shrink. She sharpened. Is the station referring to me, she asked, or to you? If I knew, I would already be offended in the correct direction. He keyed in a maintenance override and pulled up the alert tree. A progress will spun, hesitated, then resolved into a blocked access notice. External review request initiated. Non-essential personnel hold in place pending scan confirmation. Ethan stared at it with tired disbelief. I really hate the phrase external review. Celia came to stand beside him, close enough for him to feel the quiet that always arrived around her when she entered his space. Or maybe it was not her. Maybe it was him. That thought had started showing up too often in the last hour, slipping in between practical ones like a wire crossed somewhere behind the walls. Someone else is looking at this corridor now, she said. It was not a question. Ethan nodded once. Probably environmental systems. Maybe medical. Depends what kind of anomaly the station thinks it found. He paused, reading. A hidden subheader, and the muscles along his jaw tightened. Or research. Celia's gaze shifted to him immediately. Research? Meridian licenses data collection to 3 private labs. Most of it is harmless. Air quality, fatigue studies, cargo physiology for long-haul crews. But anything tagged biometric gets attention fast, especially if it looks unusual. The station hummed around them, all steel, cold light, and machine breath. Yet the corridor no longer felt hidden. It felt watched. Ethan unplugged his tablet from the wall terminal and opened a local diagnostic window, fingers moving with the quick precision of long practice. If somebody flagged this from Central, they are going to ask why 2 people in a sealed maintenance hall are generating a reading the system does not recognize. Celia looked at the screen, then at him. And can you tell them? Ethan let out a short breath. I cannot tell me. That should have felt like a joke. It did not. Because under the irritation, under the hassle of protocols and access denials and station systems with too much authority, something else had begun pressing at the edge of his thoughts. He could feel it most clearly when Celia stood near him, when the corridor seemed to take one long, slow breath and settle. He was used to noise in every form a station could make, from cooling pumps to docking alarms to people carrying their bad days down metal hallways. But this was different. Around her, the usual static in his own head had thinned. The low-grade tension he wore like a second uniform had gone quiet. Celia, still studying him, said the words he had not wanted to say aloud. You feel it too. Ethan did not answer right away. The overhead vent released another stream of chilled air, carrying the clean sterile smell of filter packs and distant coolant. Somewhere beyond the locked bulkhead, a lift descended with a deep cable hum that faded into silence. He met her eyes. I feel less tired when you are close, he said. Which does not make any sense. Celia's expression changed then, not into triumph, but into something far more dangerous because it was softer. Recognition. On my world, she said carefully, there are old studies about sympathetic resonance. Rare conditions where one biological field changes in the presence of another. Usually temporary. Usually weak. But this is not weak. Ethan looked back at the terminal, where the anomaly notice remained steady and cold. That sounds like something people with expensive badges would love to put in a lab report. Yes, Celia said. Her voice was almost a whisper now. That is what worries me. Before Ethan could respond, the terminal chimed again and a second line appeared beneath the first, remote scan authorization approved. Corridor doors will remain sealed. Ethan's shoulders went still. Celia turned toward the bulkhead as if she could already sense attention moving through it. The quiet between them was no longer peaceful. It had become precious, and somewhere beyond the steel, other people had just realized it existed. The first scan passed through the corridor so gently that Ethan only noticed it because the fine hairs along his forearms lifted at once. A transparent lattice of pale green light descended from the ceiling vents, moved across the steel walls, crossed the grated floor, and climbed over both of them in a slow measured sweep. It carried no heat and made no sound beyond a faint crystalline shimmer, like ice settling in a glass. Celia went perfectly still beside him. Ethan did the opposite. He stepped in front of the terminal, more from instinct than strategy, and watched the scan line complete its path across his chest before dissolving into the air. The screen flickered. New text began populating so quickly it looked less like typing and more like the station thinking out loud. Signal discontinuity confirmed. Cross-spectrum bioelectric suppression detected. Secondary resonance present. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "That sounds expensive," he said. Celia did not smile. Her eyes were fixed on the terminal, bright and unreadable now. "It sounds rare." Before Ethan could answer, the overhead speaker clicked on with a soft burst of static. The voice that followed was not the neutral station announcer from before. This one was human, female, professional in the polished way that tried to sound kind while assuming obedience. "Maintenance Technician Ethan Walker, this is Dr. Lenora Vale with Meridian Biomedical Review. Please remain calm. We are observing a highly unusual but potentially valuable physiological event. There is no cause for concern." Ethan looked up at the speaker grill with immediate dislike. That sentence alone is cause for concern. Celia turned toward him. The quiet around him had vanished from her face, replaced by the alert composure of someone who had lived near power long enough to know its tone. "Do not tell them more than you must," she said softly. Dr. Vale continued as if she had heard neither of them. "We are dispatching a research liaison and medical intake team to your location. For the integrity of the scan, you are instructed to remain within 3 feet of your current companion until arrival." Ethan actually laughed then, short and sharp with disbelief. "You hear that? I am not a person anymore. I am an integrity issue." The terminal chimed again. A new header bloomed across the screen in clean corporate blue, "Provisional classification pending." Below it, one phrase resolved with insulting clarity. "Nullheart subject candidate." Ethan read it twice, then once more just to make sure anger was not changing the letters. "Absolutely not," he said. Celia saw the screen and something colder than fear moved through her expression. "That is not a medical term from this station," she said. "It is research nomenclature. They are naming you before they understand you." The speaker clicked again. "Subject Walker, please confirm verbal compliance." Ethan folded his arms. "My name is Ethan." A pause. Then, noted. Which was somehow worse. Celia stepped closer until her sleeve brushed his arm. The corridor had not changed temperature, but Ethan felt the shift immediately, the same impossible ease under his ribs, the thinning of invisible static he had only just begun to recognize. Celia lifted her chin toward the speaker, every word measured. "I am Celia Vane of the Vane Accord Delegation. Any attempt to detain, isolate, or catalog the human beside me without informed consent will be entered as an interspecies ethics violation and transmitted to 3 consular channels before your team reaches this door." Silence followed that, but it was not the good kind. It was the silence of people recalculating. Ethan turned to her, startled. "You were not kidding about outranking things." She did not look away from the speaker grill. "No," on the terminal, the status field updated again. "Research liaison delayed. Ethics review requested. Access corridor under supervisory hold." Ethan exhaled slowly, part relief, part disbelief. "You just scared off a lab team with paperwork." "The correct paperwork," Celia said. Then she finally looked at him, and all the steel in her face softened into something warmer, more personal, and somehow more dangerous than authority. "But they will come back. People do not let go of miracles once they believe they have found one." Ethan glanced at the sealed bulkhead, at the terminal still glowing with words he had never asked to wear, and then at the woman whose voice had just stood between him and becoming a category. For the first time that night, the locked corridor did not feel like a trap. It felt like the last place on the station where he was still allowed to belong to himself. For a few minutes after the speaker went silent, the corridor seemed to hold its breath with them. The amber lights continued their patient sweep across steel and conduit, but the air had changed. It no longer felt like a forgotten maintenance hall. It felt claimed. Observed from somewhere beyond the bulkheads by people with screens, titles, and plans that had already begun to arrange Ethan into categories he had never agreed to enter. He stood beside the terminal with his arms folded, jaw tight, while lines of system text updated in neat clinical bursts that somehow managed to feel more invasive than a person staring. Supervisory hold remained active. Ethics review in queue. Remote observation maintained. Ethan let out a slow breath through his nose. I fix air scrubbers, he said. I replace cracked seals and argue with valves. How did that turn into this? Celia looked at him, and for the first time since the lockdown began, there was no distance at all in her expression. Because rare things are not allowed to remain ordinary for long. The words landed with quiet certainty, the kind that came from experience rather than theory. Ethan glanced at her. You say that like you know. She lowered her eyes for a moment, then lifted them again. I do. Before he could ask more, a soft chime sounded from the slim band at her wrist. Until then he had barely noticed it beneath the dark cuff of her coat. Now a thin arc of blue light lifted above it, resolving into a private comm request in a script Ethan could not read. Celia stared at the message for one still second, and Ethan saw something pass across her face that had nothing to do with surprise. Weariness. Recognition. Choice arriving on schedule. Who is it? He asked. My delegation, she said. They will have seen the ethics flag by now. The blue light hovered between them, waiting. Celia did not answer immediately. Ethan watched her thumb rest motionless near the control point. You should take it, he said. If you are some kind of important diplomatic nightmare for station management, this might help. A faint, humorless smile touched her mouth. It might help the station more than it helps you. She accepted the call. The holographic field narrowed so only she could see the full projection, but Ethan caught a glimpse of elegant architecture, silver robes, and the outline of a severe older face before she turned slightly away. Her voice shifted as she spoke, growing cooler, more formal, every inch the woman who had made a research team stop at a door. She listened for several seconds without interruption. Then she said, no, just that. One syllable, quiet and immovable. A longer pause followed. Ethan could not hear the reply, but he did not need to. He could read enough in the set of her shoulders. Instruction. Pressure. Reputation. Duty wrapped in polished language. Celia's hand tightened once at her side. You are asking me, she said, each word clear as glass, to preserve diplomatic convenience while a civilian is reclassified as property by softer vocabulary. I will not do that. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and understood that whatever rank or training or obligation had shaped her life, she was stepping against it now. Not dramatically. Not for effect. Simply because some line inside her had been reached. The call continued for another few tense moments. Then Celia ended it with a single motion and let the blue light die. The corridor felt quieter after it vanished. That sounded expensive too, Ethan said softly. This time her smile was real, though it carried sadness at the edges. Probably more expensive than the first thing. She stepped closer, close enough that the strange calm returned to his chest at once, deep and undeniable now, like a room inside him settling into its proper shape. Listen to me carefully, Ethan, she said. Whatever these people think you are, whatever word they put on a screen, you do not go with them alone. Ethan searched her face. You would risk your position for a guy you met next to a broken pressure sensor. No, Celia said, and the softness in her voice made the answer hit harder than any grand declaration could have. I would risk it for the one place in the galaxy where my mind has finally gone quiet, and for the human who did not try to own that miracle the moment he saw it. Somewhere beyond the sealed corridor, mechanisms began to cycle inside the bulkhead lock, heavy and deliberate. Ethan turned toward the door as the status strip flickered from amber to white, and knew with sudden certainty that whatever came through that opening next, Celia Vane had already made her choice. The bulkhead doors parted with a slow hydraulic sigh, and cold white light spilled into the corridor from the passage beyond. 3 figures waited there in clean station uniforms that were too precise to belong to maintenance and too polished to belong to medicine alone. At their center stood a woman in a dark slate coat with a biometric tablet glowing in one hand and a calm expression Ethan disliked on sight. Dr. Lenora Vale looked exactly like the kind of person who had learned how to sound gentle while rearranging other people's lives. "Mr. Walker," she said, stepping only as far as the threshold. "Thank you for your patience. We would like to escort you to a secure diagnostic suite so we can better understand what is happening here." Ethan stayed where he was. The corridor still smelled of metal, coolant, and a faint sterile chill drifting in from the newly opened hall, but now there was another scent too, thin and clinical, like filtered air and antiseptic packaging. It made the maintenance deck feel less like his world and more like someone else's. "No," he said simply. Dr. Vale did not react. "I understand your reluctance. This is not a detention. It is an evaluation." "You already renamed me on your screen," Ethan said. "That sounds a lot like detention with nicer shoes." To her credit, one of the staff behind her looked faintly embarrassed. Dr. Vale only adjusted her tablet. "We have identified a cross-spectrum anomaly with possible applications in long-range sensory suppression, trauma recovery, and neural field stability. The implications are significant." "He is standing right here," Celia said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the corridor more cleanly than the overhead lights. "You may speak as if he is a person." Dr. Vale's attention moved to her, cool and measuring. "Lady Vane. Your presence has already complicated what should have been a routine biomedical intake. Then let it remain complicated." Ethan felt the change in Celia before he saw it. She had stepped closer to him again, close enough that the calm under his ribs deepened into something almost physical, like warm weight settling over restless machinery. But with that closeness came something else now, something sharper beneath her composure. Strain. Her pupils had widened slightly. The elegant stillness she carried was becoming effort. Dr. Vale took one step forward. "Mr. Walker, if you leave with us voluntarily, your legal rights remain intact. If this escalates into a station safety matter, that may become less simple." Ethan opened his mouth, but Celia's fingers closed around his wrist first. Her touch was cool, steady, and urgent. "Do not go with them," she said without looking at him. "Not yet." Then she did something Ethan did not understand until it was already happening. Celia closed her eyes. The corridor air seemed to tighten. Not visibly. Not dramatically. More like the world had become aware of itself all at once. Ethan felt it in the floor through his boots, in the buzz of the lights, in the sudden sharp detail of every distant sound bleeding through the station walls. A docking clamp releasing 2 decks down. A tram braking along the central spine. The layered pulse of lives moving beyond steel in every direction. Celia inhaled hard, and Ethan realized with a jolt what she had done. She had opened herself back up to all of it. Every heartbeat. Every signal. Every living rhythm she had been spared while standing near him. Her hand tightened on his wrist, not in fear but in endurance. Dr. Vale must have seen something change, because her professional calm fractured for the first time. "Lady Vane," she said, more sharply now, "reduce your field immediately." Celia ignored her. When she opened her eyes again, their bright blue had gone almost silver with effort. "Service ladder," she whispered to Ethan. "Behind the terminal wall. Manual hatch. 30 feet. Ethan stared at her. "How do you know that?" Because I can hear the guard at the far junction shifting his weight beside it, and the engineer on the deck above complaining into his comm, and the child in the transit ring crying because her father is late, and the pilot in berth 16 counting his breaths before bad news reaches him. Her voice remained level, but the words came faster now, threaded with unbearable precision. I can hear all of Meridian again. Ethan's chest tightened. Celia. She turned to him then, and for one terrible second he saw the price of it. The strain behind her eyes. The faint tremor in her shoulders. The effort it took just to remain standing beneath the flood she had invited back in. Yet she still managed the smallest smile. Then do not waste the silence I gave you, she said. And before Dr. Vale could close the distance, Celia pivoted toward the terminal wall and slapped her palm against the concealed emergency release she had somehow sensed through steel, opening a narrow service hatch into darkness beyond. The service hatch opened on a narrow maintenance shaft washed in dim blue emergency light, its ladder dropping straight down between bundles of insulated conduit and old communication lines wrapped in silver mesh. Cool air rushed up from below, carrying the dusty metallic smell of unused spaces, machine oil, and the faint mineral tang of circulating coolant. Ethan moved first on instinct, catching the edge of the hatch with one hand and turning back with the other already reaching for Celia. Behind them, Dr. Vale was saying something sharp and controlled, but the words blurred beneath the deeper sounds now filling the shaft, the low vibration of station engines, the distant rattle of a freight lift, the soft thunder of 1,000 lives moving through Meridian's bones. Celia swayed once where she stood, and Ethan caught her by the arms before she could lose her footing. Up close he could feel the strain in her, not weakness exactly, but overload, like a system forced to run beyond its safe limit because it had chosen duty over rest. Her breathing had gone shallow. Her eyes were too bright. Celia, he said quietly. Stay with me. She blinked, focused on him with visible effort, and gave the smallest nod. Ethan guided her through the hatch and onto the ladder platform. The steel was cold through his palms. He went down first 2 rungs, then looked up. Put your foot here. Slow. I have you. She obeyed without argument, which told him more than any dramatic collapse could have. The woman who had held an entire research team at bay, with nothing but rank and moral clarity, now trusted him enough to let him lead her into darkness. Ethan took them down one careful rung at a time while the hatch above slid partway shut, muting the corridor voices into a dull metallic blur. 20 feet below, the shaft widened into a service landing no bigger than a janitor's closet, with a grated floor, a maintenance console gone dark with age, and a narrow crawl passage running off toward the station spine. Ethan stepped onto the landing and turned just as Celia reached it behind him. The moment both her boots touched the grate, her knees threatened to give. He caught her fully this time, one arm around her shoulders, the other bracing her at the waist, steadying her against the cold wall. She drew in a sharp breath, and for a second he thought the station itself had become louder, every hidden pulse in it pressing through steel, but then something changed. Not outside them. Inside her. Celia went very still in his arms. The shaft remained full of distant life. A med cart rolling 3 levels above. 2 technicians arguing softly in a vented access lane. A cluster of children in the passenger ring moving like bright little drums through her mind. She could hear all of it. All of Meridian. All except one sound she had been searching for since the docking ring. Ethan's face was inches from hers now, worn and worried and entirely real in the dim blue light. His hand rested against her back, warm through the fabric of her coat. She could feel the strength in him, the steadiness, the human simplicity of his presence. Still no heartbeat came to her from outside. And suddenly, with the clarity of a lock turning, she understood why. Her eyes widened, not from pain this time, but revelation. Ethan searched her face. What is it? Celia stared at him, every lesson of her training rearranging itself at once. I was wrong, she whispered. I thought I could not hear you because you were silent. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. But you were never absent. Ethan did not move. Around them the shaft hummed softly, blue light trembling over pipe and steel. Celia lifted one hand and laid it gently against the center of his chest, not to test him now, but to confirm what her whole body had already realized. My senses mark every life as outside me, she said. Every rhythm arrives as distance. Separate. Distinct. She swallowed, and her eyes shone with a wonder too quiet for fear. Yours does not. Somewhere between the first moment and now, my body stopped reading your heart as something beyond me. Ethan's breath caught. Celia's fingers remained over his chest, light and certain. I do not hear you, she said softly, because some part of me has already begun to keep your rhythm with my own. Above them, a hatch alarm sounded faintly through layers of steel, reminding them the station had not forgotten. But in that hidden blue-lit space between decks, with the noise of the galaxy pressing on every side and one human holding her steady, Celia Vane finally understood that the silence she had found in Ethan Walker had never been emptiness at all. It had been belonging. For a moment, Ethan could only look at her. The blue emergency light from the shaft turned the planes of her face into something almost unreal, silver at the edges, ocean dark in the shadows, but there was nothing unreal in the way she was touching him. Her hand rested over his chest with a certainty that made explanation feel smaller than the truth. Above them, the faint alarm continued to pulse through layers of steel, and farther out the station lived on in 1,000 overlapping motions she could once again hear. Yet in that cramped landing between decks, with old conduit humming behind the walls and cold air moving through the grate beneath their boots, Meridian felt very far away. Ethan swallowed once, trying to gather the right words from a mind that had never been trained for moments like this. You are saying your body thinks I am part of you now. Celia's eyes held his, bright and unflinching. Not possession, she said softly, as if she could hear the fear hidden inside the word before he even spoke it. Recognition. Ethan let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had not carried so much wonder. That is still a pretty big thing to realize in a service shaft. To his relief, a small smile touched her mouth. I did not choose the setting. He kept one arm steady around her until he felt more strength return to her posture, then reluctantly eased back just enough to look at the crawl passage running beside them. It was narrow, lined with old access rails and maintenance tags gone yellow with age, but he knew where it led. There is an observation blister 2 sections down, he said. Old emergency watch point. Nobody uses it anymore because the public decks have better glass. Celia drew a slow breath and nodded. Take me there. They moved carefully through the passage, Ethan leading with one hand along the wall and the other ready to catch her if the station's noise rose too sharply again. But something had changed. Celia still heard Meridian in all its impossible detail, the layered heartbeats, the distant movement, the endless living chorus of a station that never truly slept. It pressed at the edges of her senses like weather. Yet it no longer owned the center. The center was steadier now. The center had shape. By the time they reached the old observation blister, her steps had found their grace again. Ethan keyed the manual latch, and the narrow hatch opened with a sigh of neglected seals. Beyond it waited a small half-moon chamber with a bench bolted to the floor and a single curved pane looking out over the stars. No advertisements. No polished trim. No crowds. Just darkness, scattered with slow-burning suns and the soft reflected glow of Meridian's outer hull. Ethan stepped inside first, then held the hatch for her. Celia entered and stopped at once. Outside the glass, a freighter drifted like a lantern against the black, its running lights blinking red and gold in measured silence. Farther beyond, a pale ringed planet turned with ancient patience, its cloud bands lit by distant sunfire. The room smelled faintly of dust, cold metal, and the ghost of old insulation. Ethan sat on the bench and after a moment Celia sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither of them spoke for a long time. There was no need. The station remained somewhere behind steel and distance, along with Dr. Vale, ethics flags, classifications, and all the restless machinery of people trying to name what they could not own. Here there was only the glass, the stars, and the simple heat of another living being beside her. At last Celia turned, lifted her hand, and laid it over Ethan's again. She still could not hear his heart as something separate. She never would, not in the old way. But now she understood that some silences were not absence. Some silences were shelter. Ethan looked out at the slow wheel of the planet and then back at her. "What happens now?" he asked. Celia's gaze softened, and when she answered, her voice carried none of the strain from before. "Only certainty. Now," she said, "they may study the anomaly if they wish." Her fingers closed gently around his. "But they will never understand it, because they will keep searching for what is missing." Ethan looked at her hand over his, then at the stars beyond the glass. Celia leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, and for the first time in her life, the universe did not sound like a storm. It sounded like distance. It sounded survivable. It sounded small enough to leave outside. "And what is really there?" he asked.